Okay, so in this tutorial we're going to talk a little bit about SCCM and OS deployment, in particular zero-touch installation using SCCM 2012. So I'm using SCCM 2012 Service Pack 1, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to upgrade a Windows XP machine that has the configuration management client installed, and I'm going to upgrade that, capture all the files, all the user settings and data locally on the hard drive, which is also known as hard linking, and upgrade it to Windows 7 and then restore those files to the operating system, the data, so the user will have retained all their my documents and desktop files and whatnot. So to begin, let's go through the OS deployment section of System Center 2012, and when you install it, by default it's going to automatically create two boot images for you, one for 64-bit and one for 32-bit. Alright, what I did is I went ahead, and since I'm only deploying to Windows XP machines that are 32-bit, I right click on this boot image and I went to properties, and I made this boot image available on my distribution points. Right, and I also this is automatically populated for you. I also selected to copy that content to the distribution points. Alright, so everything else is pretty much a default. I set it to high priority, and I think that should be it for this. Right, so once you've distributed our boot image and you see success 1, now you must see success even though you may go to the distribution point and see the file in the SMS pkg folder. So you may go to a distribution point just to see if that boot image has been replicated, and you go to the packages folder and you look at the image ID, which is test 004. You're gonna see it here, but the SCCM, it has not replicated yet. You have to wait until the success is 1 and green circle. So moving on from there, you have to install now after the boot image, the task sequence is going to install the operating system. Now this is what you need to get. You need to get the source files from the Windows 7 DVD or Windows 2008 DVD if you're deploying that OS. So just a matter of right clicking, add operating system, and this has to be a shared path to that file. It doesn't have to be the same server, it can be another server. You browse to that file, and let's browse to this particular server. And you select where you have those images installed. I installed the Windows Automated Toolkit, the Windows Microsoft Development Toolkit MDT 2012 on this machine, and this installed the deployment share folder as you saw here. It's not needed, it's not required for SCCM OS deployment, but I just have an image loaded up here. So I'll go to operating systems, and I already have Windows 7 DVD. Go to sources, and you're going to select your WIM file. Go next, and it automatically detects the operating system that is going to be installed. Let's go next, and it completes the wizard. But I've already done that, and it created entry in operating system. If I go to properties on this, I do the same thing as I did for the boot image, made it available on distribution points, copied it to the distribution points, and this one is medium. It's pretty much everything else is the defaults. Okay, So now that we have our boot image and our operating system image, we go ahead and create our task sequence. Right, so you create a task sequence. You said you want to install an existing image package. You can give it a name, call it like XP upgrade 27 zero touch installation. You browse the boot image which we imported earlier into the distribution points. You select your operating system image, which we also did earlier. And this is important. You want to unselect partition and format, and we're not using BitLocker. And we can enter a default administrator password for the new OS. Remember, this is a new OS, so the applications are not going to be retained unless you have applications in your Wim image, or you select later on to include applications that are deployed from SCCM software distribution. But the application is going to be wiped, but the user data settings, desktop settings, my documents are going to be saved, as we will see later on. Configure network, select the join a domain or work group, accept the defaults for configuration manager client. And here's an important section: capture user settings and data. And instead of copying it to a SCCM state migration point over the network, we're going to say save it locally. This is useful for large users with large amounts of data on their hard drive. And we want to hard link the file, so you're not copying it to the network. Go next, and now you can choose to install any applications that you want that you have in SCCM afterward, and then you go next and you finish. So I've already went through this process, and I have already created a task sequence. And what you need to do when you create a task sequence, you then need to deploy the task sequence to your collections. So you would want to, for example, create a collection that will contain all the XP machines that are destined to be upgraded to Windows 7. And I've already created a collection here containing just one computer. Let's go next. I'm going to set it to required so that it will be made available. We want to make it available for configuration manager clients, media, and PXE. You want to make it available as soon as possible. So as soon as it gets that task sequence, it's going to go ahead and deploy. Alright, so we're gonna allow the defaults here, distribution points to download locally when needed, and click on finish. I've already done that, and this is if you go to deployments, you'll already see a deployment here that's already been created. So those three things have been done: the boot image, the operating system, the task sequence. Some other things that you need to do, which for me I think it was required. If you go into your, I think it's packages, the user state migration, which is part of the capture process. It's a package that has to be installed on the PC. So I also went ahead and I made this available to the distribution points. Again, the same thing, to copy high priority, and this is the default setting here, and set it to distribute my distribution points. And lastly, for when the computer goes into pxeboot, it's going to try to connect to the share on this computer to get that OS image, or to the distribution share. And since it's now booting up into an OS and not inside Windows using configuration manager client, you're going to need to set a network access account for your pxeboot machines to be able to access this SCCM server and its distribution packages So to do that, you go to sites, highlight your primary site, and then you're going to configure site components, software distribution, and you're going to set a network access account that has rights to those folders. I'm using the administrator account. Okay, so then you go ahead and you deploy. A couple other things, this server, it's a distribution point, and on a distribution point you can set properties. If you have servers that are distribution points, you can set properties on them so that they become pxeboot machines. So you can say enable pxeboot on a machine, and then Windows, it says Windows deployment services is also going to be installed. And when you do that, you would want to unselect require password, enable unknown computer support, and allow the distribution point to respond to incoming requests, and press OK. And that's pretty much all there is to it, to setting up a WDS server on your distribution points so that images can be deployed. Now with a WDS server, it creates a folder called remote install, and that folder will also contain boot images that you can use. So WDS can be used to deploy operating systems to your clients, but you can't do things like capture, as you're seeing here. You can't install applications after the fact, as you see here with this task sequence. You can't do a task sequence. You can only either capture a sysprepped image, a sysprepped computer, or sysprepped computer, or you can deploy an OS to a new OS to a system using a WIM file stored on the remote install folder. Alright. Also, I also installed, as I spoke about earlier, I also installed the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit. This can do almost the same thing like in SCCM. You can also do task sequences here. If I go to my deployment workbench, I think it is, yes, my deployment workbench. This is a pretty small download, but you need to have the automated deployment toolkit installed on your machine. It doesn't require a machine with SCCM. So if you don't have SCCM in your environment, you can actually use the MDT 2012, and you can actually, the images created by MDT 2012 is called light touch boot image, which you will see in a short while. And these images, these boot images, you can actually place them in your WDS boot folder. So when a pxeboot machine comes up, it's going to load the boot image created by deployment workbench, and it's gonna it can then get access to the task sequences that you create here. So it's the same process. So you can add an operating system, and you can create task sequences here as well. Same type of process as with SCCM. Okay, but of course you will have to boot. You'll have to boot the image that is created. So if I get the image should be, I think, oh, this automatically creates the image for you. So when you're finished, you have to go to update deployment share and go into the deployment share folder, and you go into root, I think, and here's your light touch images that you create. Now when you boot off of these, they will connect the share. It automatically has a URL back to the server, back to the task sequences, so it will connect back to here. You enter a password, username and password to connect back to here, and it's going to automatically run the task sequence task sequence VB script here, which is going to list all the task sequences that you have. I think it's LTI apply, I'm not sure, or light touch, I think it's that. Yeah, and basically it runs this same script here, and that script is in turn is going to call all the instructions that you have here. Yeah, so this is the screen that's going to come up when you boot from this. You can actually add this light touch boot image to your WDS and use that instead of the default WDS image that you get. Alright, so while that is taking place, let's go ahead to our XP machine. So I'm just snapshotting back to my XP machine, and as I said earlier, this is the task sequence. This is what it's going to look like on deployment toolkit. As I said, you don't need deployment toolkit. It's just another way of getting a task sequence to your machine if you don't have SCCM. Okay. So I can cancel that out. So here I'm on my XP machine, and it has some folders, some files that you're seeing here in the desktop, and I'm just gonna trigger. Okay, I don't need to trigger off, it automatically detected the task sequence advertised to this collection, and it's going to go ahead and capture the files locally, all these files that you're seeing on the desktop. And it's automatically started to capture its settings as the first setting in the task sequence. It's going to capture my files, it's going to apply, it's going to copy the boot image, it's going to reboot, it's going to boot off that boot image, that pxeboot boot image. Then it's going to apply the operating system, which is a full install of the OS, and then it's going to log into Windows, and then it's going to restore those files. So while that is going on, I'll just close off my deployment toolkit, Microsoft deployment toolkit, and let's look at the task sequence that we created earlier. So this is what this wizard created for us earlier, and it shows you the sequence of events. Okay, so if you want, you can actually come in to make some further configuration changes here. So it's going to capture install OS, and it's going to restore the files, which is what is taking place here right now. Alright, some key points to note. When you run sysprep, the Windows deployment toolkit can only capture a machine that has been, the Windows deployment services. When you pxeboot is only supported on Windows deployment services. So if you're installing over the network, if you're installing an OS over the network, and you're not using the configuration manager client, as I'm doing here, you're going to need a pxi server, and that is only supported, it's only provided by Windows deployment services. Windows deployment services can deploy an OS to, which is basically a WIM file, to a computer. It can also capture an OS, an image. So for example, you can install all the applications that you want in a machine, all the features and whatnot, and then you can go ahead and run sysprep on that machine to generalize the operating system, to remove that security identifiers and the computer name and whatnot. And then you can use WDS to boot to create a capture image of that machine, which will create a WIM file for you, and then you can use that WIM file again to deploy to new systems, which will contain all the applications that you had in the sysprep image. You can also use that WIM file in other applications like the MDT deployment toolkit, and also um, in SCCM. Okay. Now it's finished captured the files locally, and the machine is now going to restart in our Windows pre-boot environment. As you can see here, it's downloading the boot image from the SCCM server. I'm just speeding it up a little bit. It's now applying the operating system phase, and I'm just gonna fast track to the end of the installation. And I have a machine with WDS Silver installed just to show you what I was talking about before. The boot images, the XP86 that you see here comes with WDS. This light touch was imported from deployment toolkit, as we talked about before. And we created an image group and imported our operating system files here, in which case you browse to the WIM file in the sources folder. So there's not much that you can do with WDS, and then you can't really create a task sequence as you see here. You can put in drivers. Apparently you can't put in drivers, that's going to be installed, but that's about it for that. Alright.